But first up, it's getting towards the end of the year, which means it's beginning to look a lot like election season.
We may yet be months away from a federal election, but it feels like campaigning is already in full swing in Sydney.
A confident-looking PM continued his pre-election campaign blitz.
Hitting the unofficial hustings again today.
He wants to shore up as much support as possible during this unofficial election campaign.
The PM's been cooking, eating and posing for selfies in an attempt to show how Australian life is finally returning to normal.
Yeah, Scott Morrison there trying to look like life is returning to normal. Just like me. I know I went out for a haircut last week with my personal press pack of paparazzi photographers. You know, like a normal person. So the battle lines are being drawn for the next federal election, which is looking like it'll be in March or May of next year. And we can already see the themes that the leaders are going to be running on. Here's Morrison's economic pitch.
I think that does highlight that Australia's economic recovery has to be secured by people who have a track record in economic management. Otherwise, you're going to see petrol prices go up, you're going to see electricity prices go up, you're going to see interest rates go up more than they would need to otherwise.
Yes, and funnily enough, I went on the Liberal Party website, and so you can actually now buy a Keeping Petrol Prices Down mug from their online store. Funnily enough, it seems to resemble a Back in Black mug from the 2019 budget that someone's just liquid papered Keeping Petrol Prices Down on it. But that's what you expect from these guys, the better economic managers. Morrison's big overarching theme post-pandemic seems to be about the role of government.
Labor loves interfering in your life. They love telling you what to do. We've had enough of governments telling people what to do. The Labor Party's policies, as I say, they just always want to tell you what to do because they love telling you what to do. The Labor Party loves telling people what to do, and the only thing they like doing more than that is taxing them. Labor wants to tell you what to do. We don't want to tell them what to do. We want to support the decisions that they're making. Labor's all about telling them what to do.
I mean, saying Labor likes telling people what to do after the last 20 months is a bit like a child saying, oh, you can't trust my sister, she'll eat all the cookies, when they literally have a mouthful of stolen cookies. You're the man who literally shut down a group exercise class last year without even knowing what it was.
Health clubs, fitness centres, yoga, Barre, I hope I've pronounced that correct. I might need some help with that. I'm not quite sure what that is, to be honest, but...
All right, and over on the other side of politics, how's Labor leader Anthony Albanese's attack lines coming along?
This is a Prime Minister who has walked away from scrutiny. This is a Prime Minister who on fundamental issues hasn't been fair dinkum with the Australian people. This is a government that is not fit for purpose for the 21st century.
Yeah, hasn't really mastered the art of repetition, has he, old Albo? Maybe try picking one and sticking with it, hey? Labor did nail ScoMo on this, though.
Scott Morrison was himself a target today as Labor scrutinised his claim that he has never told a lie while in public life.
You ever told a lie in public life?
I don't believe I have, no.
Prime Minister, you said earlier today you've never lied in public life. Is that really true?
No, that's what I believe to be true. And if, what are you suggesting? When do you think I did?
Yes, that's right. Scott Morrison believes he has never told a lie in public life, which sounds like a lie to me. But if he does actually mean it, he could still be lying after all. He's just employing the George Costanza defence.
Jerry, just remember, it's not a lie if you believe it.
Thankfully, Deputy Prime Minister Barnaby Joyce was a bit more frank about if he'd ever lied.
Probably.
And also just no shame about that?
Well, I don't know. If you ask me a personal question about my life, I don't have to give you the straight answer.
Yes, you know, personal questions like, where'd your wife go? Who's this new young woman? Didn't she work in your office? How many kids do you have now anyway? And on a side note, while we're talking about Barnaby this week, the COP26 conference, of course, announced that they're going to start phasing down coal. The world is going to work towards the phasing down of coal, which of course meant Barnaby Joyce was out spruiking it.
The Nationals leader putting the coal back in the coalition.
If the world's buying it, there's a market for it.
Yes, Barnaby, but there's also a worldwide market for human slaves and black market organs, but Australia doesn't decide to trade in these things because they're evil. Mind you, if you feel like selling your brain to black market organ buyers overseas, go right ahead, because I don't think they'll have much interest in your liver. Oh, and while we're talking about coal, this is what Boris Johnson had to say at the end of the COP26 conference this week.
It is beyond question that Glasgow has sounded the death knell
for coal power.
Which of course led Scott Morrison and National Senator Matt Canavan to say, "Death knell? You mean still alive for decades to come, don't you?"
Do you agree that COP26 sounded the death knell on coal?
No.
So you disagree with Boris Johnson?
No, I don't believe it did. And for all of those who are working in that industry in Australia, they'll continue to be working in that industry for decades to come.
There's never been stronger demand for our coal, and given the fact that the agreement did not say that coal needs to be phased down or taken out, it's a big green light for us to build more coal mines, supply the world more coal, because that is what brings millions of people out of poverty. So we've got the best quality coal in the world, and we should be supplying that to the world because it's good for the environment to do that.
What the hell? Good for the environment? That's a bald-faced lie, Matt Canavan. Ugh, well, I certainly hope that got fact-checked on the Today Show. In fact, it was one of those debate segments, so let's just see what kind of a rebuke he got from the other panellist.
I grew up in a coal mining community, so I think there will be people who take comfort from that position from Glasgow.
Ah, what a counterpoint. That's exactly the kind of balance you expect from the Nine networks these days. On one side, you have a Conservative Nationals senator who loves coal debating against a Murdoch Daily Telegraph editor. What balance? Meanwhile, the ABC seems to have to put a pro-genocide panellist on every episode of Q&A, even the arts one. Last week, the panellists were John Bell, Jimmy Barnes, Katie Noonan, and Bashar al-Assad for some unknown reason, just so Andrew Bolt and the Sky News night crew wouldn't get upset that the ABC's gone too left-wing. Anyways, back to the environment, and last Friday afternoon, the government finally released its net zero modelling. And it revealed an interesting election policy that nobody was expecting.
The Prime Minister is heading to the next election with a proposed carbon tax, but under a different name. It was unveiled in modelling today as part of Australia's plan to reach net zero.
Paying farmers, companies and communities for projects removing carbon from the atmosphere through credits they can trade with polluters to offset emissions. Not a tax, says Scott Morrison, a price.
What's the difference between that and a carbon tax?
Well, what we have is the cost of abatement that is run through our Climate Solutions Fund. So we've been running that for years. That's what we're doing. We don't have a carbon tax. We will never have a carbon tax. No, there's no carbon tax in Australia, and there won't be one.
Yeah, never going to be a carbon tax. Where have we all heard that before?
There will be no carbon tax under the government I lead.
Well, I guess that means the Liberals are definitely going to have a carbon tax. Well, Labor, I know who you need to hire if you want to win the next election.
We will fight this tax every second of every minute of every day of every week of every month. I think there will be a people's revolt against this carbon tax.
Yes, and Tony Abbott's definitely available. I mean, all he's doing at the moment is his podcast, which means he must really be down on his luck. And wouldn't you know who else hates the carbon tax? Scott Morrison doing his impression of Borat.
Some may call this a carbon tax, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to call it the Borat tax, Mr. Speaker. The Borat tax, which will be put on by the Labor Party with carbon credits to Kazakhstan. And I know what Borat would think of the Labor Party's policies on emissions reduction, Mr. Speaker. Very nice, very nice.
Anyways, back to the fake election campaign, and there's even been some policy announcements this week.
Prime Minister Scott Morrison will tomorrow unveil his plans for a technological revolution in Australia, starting with a $100 million investment in new critical technologies.
Yes, and if they really want to win this election, one of those technologies will be a magical machine that makes you forget about the last 8 years. No, seriously though, Scott Morrison did outline what technology this includes.
With an initial focus on cyber capabilities, artificial intelligence.
Yes, that's right, artificial intelligence, because clearly he doesn't have any natural intelligence to begin with. Thankfully, Chris Uhlmann from Nine had a longer and better pronounced list of what the new technological policies will include.
Advanced materials, artificial intelligence, biotechnology, energy and the environment, quantum computing, sensing, timing and navigation, and transport, robots and space.
Yes, Scott Morrison is trying to win the 2022 election with Robots. And yes, robotic innovation is something that Australia is increasingly becoming renowned for and better at. I mean, here was an Australian robot that made the news just last week. Let's see what it does. I bet it's something that's truly important and life-saving. Let's have a look.
A Bunnings store in Melbourne has introduced a sauce bot.
What?
Which smothers the iconic sanger in tomato and mustard in just seconds.
That's not a sore spot for anyone.
Yeah, hopefully the sauce bot is easier to understand than the last great Australian robotic innovation, which was Dexter from the 80s dating TV show Perfect Match.
I have really bent over backwards to find out your perfect match with a compatibility score of 75%. It's
Wow, robots really have come a long way since then. I mean, Dexter couldn't even dispense mustard. Well, clearly I don't think Morrison's going to win the election just with robots and coal miners. Who else is he courting? That's right, you guessed it. Anti-vaxxer conspiracy theorist nutjobs.
Our vaccinated Prime Minister is tonight accused of pandering to anti-vaxxers to lift his election chances after saying he doesn't support government-imposed jab mandates once targets are reached.
We're not in favour of mandatory vaccines imposed by the government. Businesses can make their own choices.
Arguing once herd immunity is achieved, unvaccinated people should not be shut out.
They should be able to go and get a cup of coffee in Brisbane when you're over 80%, regardless of whether you've had the vaccines or not.
Yes, and coincidentally, the worst thing if you happen to catch coronavirus when you go out for coffee in Brisbane is that you had to drink the coffee in Brisbane. Stephen Miles, the Deputy Queensland Premier, knew what was up with Morrison's comments, though.
A Prime Minister more interested in currying favour with coffee baron donors and lunatic backbenchers than the health and the jobs of Queenslanders.
Wow, little did I know that the coffee barons still held such sway over our main political parties. Mind you, I have to say I prefer this over America, where, you know, they have the gun lobby. I mean, they have the NRA, we have Nescafe. They have Smith & Wesson, we have Pablo's and Rusty's. They have Tobin Arms, we have Toby's Estate. I have Wikipedia, I could go on and on. Also, speaking of coffee, if you want to be my personal coffee baron, you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/newsfighters. And finally, on the election campaign, Morrison knows the way to clinch the deal and win the election is to probably just try the most tried and trusted thing he always does: bribe us with tax cuts.
An extra $1,000 could be on the way for millions of Australians as part of a pre-election tax sweetener from the Morrison government.
Yeah, so in conclusion, Scott Morrison is trying to score another miraculous election win by pandering to coal miners, conspiracy theorists and coffee barons, while trying to confuse us with nonsense technobabble about robots and green hydrogen, while basically introducing a carbon tax, the opposition of which was the main tenet that brought his whole government to power 8 years and 2 prime ministers ago. All the while, he's going to simultaneously hand out endless free money in the form of unsustainable tax cuts while pretending the other guys are the bad economic managers. And if Scott Morrison thinks we're dumb enough not to realise that his government believes in nothing except lying to win elections, well, ScoMo mustn't have much
artificial intelligence